Hello, everybody. I'm back. I'm Dan, and I'm here with Russ.
Fractal University. Greetings, tribe. Today's topic is going to be fractal compression, a practical understanding of bliss and peak perception. Let's rock and roll.
Yeah, we've been doing fractalu.com, and then Russ has been providing wonderful feedback with his shamanic experience. And we're trying to do this series in a way which leads from the theory to a really practical understanding of these things. And one of the key things we've been discussing right along is that if you have access to any form of bliss peak experience, the radiance that results and generates is key to the physics of lucid dreaming, the physics of soul, literally the physics of what you take through death, and the physics of clairvoyance. It's all part of that coherent longitudinal array interferometry, which is generated when the body experiences the right kind of compression, which obviously self-similar fractal visualize actually pine cones. Actually, these are wonderful from Klaus Bamberg, klausbamberg.net. In fact, I'm going to share he was kind enough to send another one of these. Let's see if I have the right window here. Skype Messenger Safari, here we go. Okay, now, yes. So can you see the screen there, Russ?
Yes.
Yes. So Klaus started making these pine cone shapes when we were studying fields of form, vortex of life, Lawrence Edwards biodynamics, and realizing that, as the biodynamic people say, when the pine cone opens and closes, it's actually adjusting the geometry of the capacitive seeds. The seeds on the surface of the pine cone actually have a capacitive function to adjust the amount of voltage that this charge device is making from gravity. And so indeed, the small but important amount of capacitance of these devices has a measurable effect on plant growth. And actually, it is that implosion that creates fertility, because that generates the ability to implode, compress, and radiate longitudinally, which is, we know, longitudinal waves trigger growth and germination. So you can read about that at bioarchitects.net and see the pictures. And then you can see more at Klaus Bamberg's website, klausbamberg.net. And that's our center in Torino, where Russ is right now.
Yes, yes, yes. This area is amazing. We're 30 minutes away from the Alps, the first line before the mountains begin. I actually went to Mont Blanc just a week ago, was running barefoot all day, meditating, took a nice little dip in the waterfall, and fell asleep in a cave. So it was majestic, we'll say, say it like that.
It's the foot of the Alps. They call it Piedmont, the foot of the mountains, and it's just up from Torino. And there our center there. You can see the pictures of that center at goldenmean.info/Italian, where we've done lectures there for many years. So Klaus is building these out of many different materials. Russ has some, and he was kind enough just to send one here. And they demonstrate the power of implosive capacitance, which is literally the essence of bioarchitects.net and bioarchitecture in general, that if the compression has symmetry, it causes growth. And that's what we want to investigate today, actually, is, you see all these Native Americans, and they're always lining up in what they call the four directions. They line up the stones, they find the magnetic line, they get the four directions lined up, and then they use the four directions to create sacred ritual and bliss, actually. So what is it about the symmetry of charge lines approaching symmetrically from opposite directions that causes life force and bliss and peak perception? And what does that have to do with fractality? And can we apply that practically to understand how to do bliss better for ourselves? With that in mind, I want to show you a picture from the original nuclear reaction. So first, this is the central theme here of our lecture series. It's called Bliss Imploded DNA, thephysicsofsoul.com. And you see, when a vortex is lined up correctly with a caduceus down the vortex called optimized translation of vorticity, then in that particular charge vortex, the transverse electromagnetic coming in one side, by being squeezed down the throat of the vortex accurately, emerges at the throat or the nozzle of the squirt gun pine cone as coherent longitudinal EMF, and that compressional wave, sometimes called scalar, when it's symmetric, squeezing from symmetric opposite directions, causes implosive compression and actually generates coherent longitudinal EMF. And that, when that's happening in your DNA in your glands, when you're in the sacred four directions, sacred space, you're generating actually the radiance, the coherent physics of bliss. Now, we're using the website here at plankfire.com, and there's a lovely picture we have here. Here's the metaphor for understanding how it is that compression is making the magic. And, when magnetic lines cross at symmetry at a distance, the sacred magnetic lines of the Earth, Bruce Cathy famously measured a reduction in nuclear critical mass where magnetic lines cross. Hello? Why? What makes critical mass is symmetric opposing compression. So we're looking here at a picture of the original nuclear device. So this is the original attempt, Oppenheimer's work, as it were. And to make the first nuclear device, they called it implosion. And do you notice there's a certain symmetry here? In fact, is there a hint of dodecaecosa? Why did they call this implosion? And why was implosion the name for the first nuclear detonation system? They had to have the compression waves align precisely from pairs of opposing directions. And that symmetry of compression, when it's self-similar, perfectly, it actually makes a golden ratio pine cone down the throat, as it were. And that implosive compression is the moment when you have what's called critical mass. Actually, we know now that the nucleus, the nuclear hadrons, neutrons, and protons, they're actually arranged in a dodeca in the nucleus in the work of chemist Moon. So the nucleus is triggered by a self-similar, hint, fractal geometry that initiates successful compression, and that triggers the radiance. Remember, the neutrons that bounce off the nucleus, creating a critical mass, a critical number of neutrons that are bouncing to trigger other atoms, for them to emerge coherently requires the majority of the inertia of the charge wave, that is the neutron itself is basically a charge wave as well. The majority of the inertia had to be longitudinal or compressional because the transverse component of that wave ain't going to do much. If you're trying to give somebody a good hug, you don't do this. No, this doesn't make a good hug. You got to do this. That's called the perfect squeeze. So we have a slideshow that goes with this now. We want to apply that thought to how you practically arrange in your life for a environment that enables compression. Hint, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi ain't going to help. It's going to shake up the aura like this. Whereas the ancients, when they wanted to have peak perception, when they wanted to have telepathy, they found where the magnetic lines crossed in perfect opposing pairs, initiating this beautiful compression. So the story to this Mori is hopefully a practical hygiene. Before we do those slides, any thoughts or comments so far?
Yeah. Would like to just add that's also what you get when you go to the ocean or the sea, why you feel so calm, and because it organizes your aura.
Beautiful. Perfect. Exactly. That's exactly what we mean. In fact, we talked about Jean-Charles Moyen when he first imploded his brainwaves and he did teleportation with witnesses. He always came and went initially from the ocean, from the beach, because the longitudinal coherence there enabled implosion into the nodes of the array. And the idea is to inhabit that larger array coherently if you would like to lucid dream, remote view, astral travel, and take memory through death. It's all about jumping from the little array into the bigger array. And that requires this embedding principle, which is the result of successful compression. Good. Perfect example. So that leads us to the slideshow. Now, the slideshow for today is from the slideshow we call the Star Trek future. Let's see if this is going to work here. So opposing vortex is just like the opposing pine cones of the caduceus, the symbol of the medical profession and the symbol of our therapy. So at the implosion point center, you have the Planck dimension, which is where the squeezing comes to alignment with all other Planck dimensions. And that's common denominator of the Planck dimension is what enables getting into and out of that array. That's why all implosive compression is tuned to Planck, called planckfire.com, P-L-A-N-C-K-P-H-I-R-E, planckfire.com. And that's the principle of implosion that causes gravity, consciousness, life force, and all negentropy. And so these are the frequencies if you multiply Planck by golden ratio for that cascade. So again, we've talked about this many times. This is the implosion, and this is also the slide which we invented. I invented therapy.net from this principle. And here is Tom Bearden's work showing that the same implosion to Planck. Well, actually, at that point, he didn't know that it was implosion to Planck. He was using Antoine Prieurie's frequencies, which are very close to a Planck, and he showed indeed that the resultant longitudinal coherent waves had a dramatic effect on seeds, in this case, exposing lentil seeds to this cascade, which now we know is right here, very close to golden ratio times Planck. So there's a whole section of our Therify website talking about how the longitudinal wave that results causes fertility, but it also causes peak perception. And here is Jean-Charles Moyen, we just talked about. Here is the golden ratio and octave cascade from alpha in green to gamma up top. And that cascade is the squirt gun pine cone that enabled him. Then he felt one eye saw where he was going from and the other eye saw where he was going to, and he would bilocate, teleport repeatedly with witnesses and return with sand between his toes. The idea is that turning inside out point where the implosion happens is actually, it's called consumed perspective, but what is in fact consumed is at the point of turning inside out is where the implosion point of the waves at the Planck threshold exchanges inertia with every other wave in that array, meaning you can't get in there to the collective unconscious, the ancestor memory, unless you have symmetry with that array. That is the test for pure intention. Maybe Russ has something to say about testing for pure intention.
Yeah. Well, first off, through breath is how you access all of this by
Absolutely.
holding
Well
your breath.
said. Yes.
And then once you generate that charge, I sometimes teach people that when you close your eyes, go into the array, go into your eyes, and
Yes.
that usually gets people out of their body pretty quick.
Yes, exactly. So, for example, the 0.1 hertz 10-second breath, which is precisely golden ratio times Planck, and that is the Mayer wave, the most important frequency in the blood and the spine liquid pump and the heart rate variability HRV LF component. So yeah, that 10-second breath, for example, very coherent, very long, embedding in the long wave. And every yogi knows, and every Kundalini aficionado, that breath is the way you control that. So this is slides you've seen from flameinmind.com. This is, in my case, me making 5 harmonics in golden ratio in my brain waves from delta. I have very big delta, often long wave coherence, which means I get to hear ancestors sometimes. But you see, actually, what you don't see on the top here is my gamma, because actually my gamma wasn't very well present. In fact, I ain't very good at making gamma. Which means, I get to hear ancestor memories, but at the gamma coherence, I'm not quite there very often. So that means my lucid dreaming and my remote viewing ain't quite so good either. So that's my work, is to train. I can get the low frequency cascade, which is waves of bliss, very nicely. But coherent gamma, that's my job. But you can tell where you're at when you measure it. So there's many articles. Our friend Mei-Wan Ho wrote that space-time is fractal and quantum coherent in the golden ratio, and that fractality perfected by golden ratio is the implosion. And we have many papers on this, for example, in the physics of heart coherence, that your heart actually turns inside out recursively, implosively, electrically. And that is literally, technically, the electrical origin of the voltage of your heart's beat. It is profoundly implosively fractal. And also the physics of actual birthing, that the egg gets to fertilize the seed right here only if it delivers enough capacitance to cause it to dimple recursively and thus turn inside out. And so that actually, as there's 7 stages of invagination in the Steiner work, and you see that the donut is self-organizes into the 7 smaller donuts, which is the physics of 7 spins of the tetra, which is all about the origin of heart muscle and Hebrew and 7arrows.net. So the actual self-organization of the 7-color donut, and this is the physics of Hebrew, and it is about opposing pairs becoming implosive. And you've seen these slides before. So this was the key slide. You see that the pine cones implosive vortex have to approach each other accurately from opposing 4 directions. This is called sacred 4 directions in Hopi, but in optical physics, where they make negentropy and time reversal, phase conjugate optics, they call it 4-wave mixing. And so these have to line up pretty accurately. Actually, if there's lasers lining up, you got to do it within angstroms. If these are sound waves lining up, you get a little bit more permissive, because the sweet spot at the center is bigger when the wave is longer. And so many other sources have agreed that this phase conjugation is the cause and mechanism of perception. You get an eyeball because the plasma vortex of charge inside your head has come to focus. Hello, and that's called phase conjugation. And that literally turns into an eyeball, and we see that when children see without their eyes. And this is a picture of the optical origin of the photon right here on the right. Does that look like 4-wave mixing? And then see how this is reflected in the brain geometry, that when the 2 opposing hemispheres implode accurately, compressing the pine cone pineal implosively, the coherent longitudinal, and in Kundalini, you feel the pine cone burn. I mean, the pineal you feel, and you actually feel that squirt gun coming out the top of your head. Yes, Russ?
Oh, nothing. I've been able to through doing a lot of breath work, I've been able to, it accidentally happened the first time. I saw myself once building the corpus callosum and
Yes.
holding high charge. I was able to, I thought I was trying to get out of my body one time, and then I'm sitting there and I can hear voices, but I'm like, I can't see anything. And all of a sudden I realized that I'm in the back of my head listening to my left hemisphere and right hemisphere having their own thoughts. And then I thought to myself, okay, so let's think of one thought and see how my left hemisphere and my right hemisphere think. And then I started playing with my brain and seeing what kind of charge I can hold. After that, once my energy body came back into just my physical consciousness, I remembered a dream, I remembered a lucid dream, and I went astral. It was like different bodies, different frequencies I was perceiving all at the same time. It was miraculous.
Yes. Beautiful. And so an example of that working inside the brain, like the idea of brain gym, is this concept of infinity walk by Deborah Lawrence, a friend, who basically, when you walk in a figure 8 and then you do the cross call, and you can do it to your favorite music too, the forcing the blood flow to cross the corpus callosum makes the corpus callosum get hot, actually. And children who are taught to do the infinity walk cross crawl powerfully, they find that within weeks, major improvement in the symptoms of dyslexia, repeatedly, replicably. Hello, dyslexia goes away if you implode your brain. Why? Because dyslexics who are measurably more creative, usually, have more wires across the corpus callosum measurably. But how do you get them to sort? You have to actually ring the donut until they create a tighter vortex cross at the center, and then everything is sorted, just like a good fight in an Irish pub. I mean, the result of successful compression. So this is the early work at showing golden ratio in brainwaves correlates with peak perception in children behind flameinmind.com. This shows when you do have golden ratio heterodynes, the zone of coherence in the EEG goes from the dissociated EEG coherence at the hemispheric extremes here by the ears. Instead, with golden ratio, Bliss binaural beat implosive sound from flameinmind.com, flame in sound. The zone of coherence in the brain waves moves to the transcendent top of the head. Literally, the top of the head lights up. And this is the early work, the mind mirror literature. They had measured thousands of people's brain waves. This is the alpha, this is the beta. And their picture of the brainwave content of those who reached spiritual insight, literally bliss, their picture, the peaks of the brainwaves in their picture were golden ratio, but they didn't know it. But this work is very old, it's powerful. And so this part of the slideshow is about Andrei Puharich, which most of you have seen. Basically, his development of a piezo trigger for the bone near the ear resulted in hearing for deaf people. But if you understand the piezo trigger when it's phase conjugate, hello, the same people that started to hear when they had the piezo in their bone started to get clairaudient. Ooh. And then Andrei Puharich, very shortly thereafter, was making the phone calls to Enki, Ea, Atun, which resulted in Phyllis Schlemmer and the origin of Star Trek. This is why the slideshow is called Star Trek Future. Because why was Andrei Puharich selected for the first phone calls to Atun, Enki, which became the Star Trek series in Phyllis Schlemmer's courses in the UK? The reason was because he had tripped over the physics of clairaudience, the physics of ancestor phone calls. So we've worked a lot on this piezo triggering at piezofire.com, and we don't need to go into all of that here. And our plasmafire.com device works with the same symmetry. So yeah, this is the point here, that the physics of clairvoyance, clairaudience is the implosive point of charge coupling into the longitudinal array. So this is how Andrei Puharich's study of capacitive bone conduction led him to the early clairvoyance. And then there's the discussion here of the astral hygiene. And stay tuned, there's going to be a conversation in a few days with Michael Sarian, who was speaking about John Dee's communication with the angels and asking critically whether or not there was astral hygiene. So more to follow on that conversation. So the phase conjugate dielectric field directly imitates how consciousness behaves. The physics paper is called Allison barium titanate land, that phase conjugate electric fields appear to self-organize and communicate with each other non-locally at a distance. Hint that non-locality, action at a distance, which current physics says entanglement causes the wormholes to work, is more accurately expressed as phase conjugation as the perfected form of embedding, which is entanglement perfected, hooks up the longitudinal array, a more accurate language than just saying the wormholes got connected. So this discussion of phase conjugate dielectrics is all very interesting. And again, you can see this slideshow at fractalfield.com/slideshow. And there's a section here about Michael Ash, we've talked about, who was the time chair empath at Montauk, and how that implosion enabled them to time travel and time reverse. And so this is about that phase conjugate coating on the back of the obsidian mirror of the Olmec, enabling them to make ancestor phone calls. So the phase conjugate coating, which actually John Dee and Kelly used in their Showstone, and Nostradamus, we think, used the phase conjugate coating under his scrying water as well, that the phase conjugate coating enables ancestor phone calls because of the embedding coherent interface with the longitudinal array, the radio for ancestor phone calls. So this is about the Olmecs and this source for, yeah, we're not going to do all that. And so we're going to have another film coming up soon about John Dee, and with the question is whether calling angels is useful or dangerous, which was a question that applies to Andrei Puharich too, because there was astral hygiene issues. So the physics of Agnihotra is the same four-wave mixing. You had to do it at sunrise, sunset, because that is the phase conjugate array embedding moment. And then you have a living biologic plasma, and in that living biologic plasma, the shortwave can embed in the long wave. And those who did Agnihotra survived Bhopal, and they survived Nagasaki because of the implosive plasma resulting from implosive conjugation. And so again, the stacked gold layers of a real stupa, not the modern ones that where they put steel rebar in the damn thing, which is a horrible sin. No, but in the real stupa, a profound implosive capacitance, the very definition of sacred space. And so here about fractal compression and lining things up if you would like to plan a successful death. If you know the electrical engineering of successful death, the Heinrich-Clavet form constants. And we use the example of a good place to die right here in the bed at Machu Picchu, very well fractally aligned. I don't know if they're inviting you there to die, but just to understand what for birth and death, you need to line things up. Hello, it's obvious. And how that implosive compression works in the phonon liquids in the brain, in the physics of Kundalini and Bliss, goldenmean.info/Kundalini. Do you see how that fits the theme of the day, which is implosive compression generating bliss and peak perception? And even the frequencies of sound, the ringing in the ears heard by meditators as measured by Bentov. And here's the actual calculation of the phase conjugate frequencies of implosion. Okay. And toward the end of this slideshow, just to say, Nature magazine says the universe is dodeca. New Scientist magazine says the universe is fractal. I think they're both right because that's how you stabilize gravity. And that's the point, that fractal compression is not just the cause of gravity, it's a cause of perception itself, because it makes the implosive negentropy that allows embedding into the array. The array rather looks like this. So here is the concluding picture here, the life-giving capacitance of the well-tuned pine cone of fractal implosive compression. And end of slideshow.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So now the question on the table is, does this help you practically as you plan? Because you know, if you would like a good immune system and to have a soul and to take memory through death and a lucid dream, those all require access to a regular form of bliss process. If you would like to plan to have access to bliss process, then probably understanding some of this may help. For example, make a magnetic map of your bed and your house and line up the magnetic lines and get rid of the damn electrosmog and all the metal that's preventing the implosion of the natural magnetic lines, which were designed to help make you mindful and blissful. In other words, get the hell out of the damn city. Well, I don't know if whoever invented cities has apologized yet, but I think they should. But that's just
Agreed. Agreed.
Well, the point is that we begin to actively know how to do what Castaneda recommend, that every room that you enter, before you sit down or choose where you're going to be in that room, you locate your place of power in that house, in that town, in that village, in that room, in that bed, in that altar, wherever. Locating the place of power is to locate where the charge implodes, the center of symmetric compression. And there's a practical, we demonstrated that. We were out west of, I think it was Jocelyn Eastman. It was wonderful. She had this sacred dome, actually. And we found in that building where there was the most echo was, in fact, close to where the space is sacred. So remember, the sound wave has a primary longitudinal component. So the place where an echo is possible is more than parallel to place where charge implosion is possible. The old story of the Gurdjieff movie, the Sufi who wins the award is the one who can best make an echo in the mountains. Well, actually, the ability to get immortal at death, the electrical name for that is the perfect echo. And on that note, I hope we had a happily ever after. What do you think, Russ?
It was beautiful. Beautiful. Remember, tribe, set your intention. If you want it, you will achieve it.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. So this was just a note about fractal compression practically applied to bliss process and peak perception. Thank you very much. Dan Winter and Russ out. Fractalfield.com, fractalu.com. Blessings.
Next time.
See you. Bye. Bye.